Legal compliance is the concept that you are aware of what the laws are that govern your particular business, and that you have the appropriate internal controls in place to be as compliant as possible, given that we're all human beings and everybody makes mistakes, so nobody's going to be perfect. The export license piece of it is a very unique portion of it, or a very discrete portion of it, having to do with understanding both the commerce and state rules, as well as a handful of other agencies that have controls in place or requirements in place that you have to comply with in order to export goods. There are basically 4 or 5 different avenues in terms of lawyers that practice international law. One of which is the lawyer that does sort of the transactional work, or the M&A work, or the big deal. Then you have international litigation, which is more often than not what's called alternative dispute resolution, so arbitration, mediation. Then you have sort of the trade lawyers, which is the niche that I have, so they do import, they do export, or they do both. You have lawyers that work for banks and other financial institutions where they really understand letters of credit, documents against acceptance, and the international banking end of things. And then the last piece of it, which is equally important, is the lawyers that work for the government, who typically do trade policy work. So they're at the table when a trade agreement, for example, is negotiated. And each one of those has a certain number of skills that are interchangeable, but the technical knowledge is somewhat different from one to the next. Obviously, the traditional way you get in is you get a 4-year college degree, and then you go to law school. And so that's sort of the starting point for this discussion. Somewhere along the line, if you want to be able to do international trade in the broadest sense of how that's defined, well, you need to really understand how cargo flows, what the documents are, and sort of all of the other pieces that come into understanding the movement of goods and the documentation that supports them. And then separate and apart from that, as a lawyer, you need to have good analytical skills. You need to be able to explain the law clearly, not using legalese. And you need to have an ability to problem solve and lay out for clients what their options are, what the pluses and minuses are for each of those options, and then allow the client, whose business it is, to make the final decision. They're valuable because they're focused on the hot issues of the day. So it's a good way to find it, to keep current on what those issues are. If you don't have experience and you're interested, certainly if you're in law school clerking, if you're not yet in law school going to work for a business, or interning with them to the extent that you can get that kind of a spot, those are all things that are helpful in giving you real-world experience that then makes you that much more valuable when you actually go into the marketplace. The where can I get information really is 2 answers. One is the LA County Bar Association has a customs law committee. So that's a good place, although we don't tend to meet that often. A better place is the American Bar Association has a section on international law. It has a customs committee. It has an export controls and economic sanctions committee. It has an international trade committee. It has a national security committee. Those are 4 committees that are the most directly relevant if you're going to talk about issues related to international trade of import or export. And they're very active, putting on programs constantly. So the ABA website is a good place. Unfortunately, for my field, the only entree really is once you've gotten through law school. And so the trick is to have that real-world experience beforehand. And then to figure out, do you want to work for the government? Do you want to be in the private sector? Do you want to be in-house? Do you want to be in a law firm? Or do you, God forbid, actually want to start your own law firm?